A stream of milk falls through empty air. This is the only motion in a room that has not moved for 367 years. The milk leaves a ceramic jug, crosses 6 inches of 17th-century Dutch light, and lands inside an earthenware bowl. In that crossing, something happened that still confuses conservators who examine it under infrared light in the climate-controlled rooms of the Rijksmuseum. The woman pouring this milk is as still as the wall behind her. Her hands are more patient than stone. According to conservation records at the Rijksmuseum from 2022, advanced imaging technology revealed 2 objects Vermeer painted over before completing this work. A jug holder with ceramic vessels hanging from wooden pegs, sketched quickly in black paint behind the woman's head, then buried under pale layers. A fire basket woven from willow stems, the kind used to warm an infant's bedding, painted at her feet and then erased. The original linen canvas still has its tacking edges, the fabric stretched across a wooden strainer in a studio room in Delft sometime around 1658. The painting measures 45.5 centimeters by 41 centimeters, small enough to hold in your arms. This is not fiction. This is what this painting still reveals. What you are looking at is an act of subtraction. A man named Johannes Vermeer spent months constructing a kitchen scene, then removed almost everything that made it a kitchen. What remains is a paradox that museum directors still call unquestionably one of their finest attractions. The question embedded in this canvas is simple. How do you paint time standing completely still while simultaneously painting the only motion that matters? Every other Dutch painter of kitchen maids in 1658 filled their canvases with narrative, symbolic vegetables, dangling fowl, men making obvious advances. Vermeer painted a woman pouring milk, alone, and made that enough. Before we go further, a small acknowledgement for those of you listening late. It is well past midnight now, or approaching it, or somewhere in those hours when museums are locked and paintings hang in darkness. If you are listening in bed, or on a long night drive, or in the particular solitude that comes between 10 at night and 3 in the morning, you are in good company. Leave a comment below about which painting you would like to hear about next. Consider subscribing if you appreciate documentaries that treat art history as something lived rather than lectured. And now, step with me across a threshold. You are standing in a room in Delft in the autumn of 1658. The floorboards are brick, not wood. Cold rises through the soles of your shoes. This is the second floor of a house on the Oude Langendijk, in the Catholic quarter they call the Papists' Corner, where hidden churches operate behind ordinary facades. The room smells of linseed oil, chalk dust, and the faint mineral scent of wet plaster. A window to your left, north-facing, lets in the flat light of late morning. You can see the grain of the wooden strainer frame propped on an easel. The canvas is already primed with lead white, mixed with chalk and earth pigments, visible in later X-ray analysis. A young man stands before the canvas with a brush. His name is Johannes Vermeer. He is 26 years old. In 4 months, his wife Catharina will give birth to their 4th child, though 4 others have already been buried before baptism. He converted to Catholicism 5 years ago to marry her, and they live here with Catharina's mother, Maria Thins, whose money pays for the Afghan lapis lazuli, ground into ultramarine blue, a pigment more expensive than gold. The room is quiet except for the brush against canvas and the sound of his breathing. What he has sketched in black paint looks like a normal kitchen scene: a maid at work, a jug holder on the wall, a fire basket near her feet, the kind of painting that would sell for 40 guilders at auction, maybe 50 if the buyer appreciated fine detail. Vermeer has seen hundreds of these kitchen scenes. His father, Régnier, dealt in paintings from the inn called Mechelen on the market square, where artists came to drink and argue. Young Johannes grew up watching them. He knows exactly what these paintings are supposed to contain, and he is about to paint over almost all of it. The world Vermeer inhabited was one where kitchen maids carried particular meanings. According to Dutch art historians studying the period from 1600 to 1679, of 72 kitchen paintings described in specific rooms in Dutch inventories, only 3 were found in actual kitchens. The rest hung in parlours and sitting rooms where wealthy merchants could contemplate them. Art theorist Gérard Deleuze wrote that kitchen scenes should only be displayed in kitchens because of their inherently vulgar subject matter. The market disagreed. Kitchen maids sold. For 2 centuries before Vermeer, Netherlandish painters had depicted milkmaids and kitchen workers as subjects of erotic possibility. The tradition stretched back to Antwerp painters like Joachim Beukelaar and Frans Snyders, who filled their canvases with coded signals: dangling birds representing male anatomy, open jugs. The Dutch word melken, meaning to milk, was slang for sexual attraction or luring. Lucas van Leyden's 1510 engraving, The Milkmaid, made the connection explicit. By 1658, any educated Dutch viewer would understand what they were looking at when they saw a young woman alone in a kitchen, sleeves rolled up to reveal pale forearms, usually kept covered. In Leiden, just 30 kilometers north, Gerrit Douw had perfected the art of the ambiguous kitchen scene. His 1646 painting, Girl Chopping Onions, now in the British Royal Collection, showed a young woman with a pewter tankard, onions said to have aphrodisiac properties, and a dangling bird. The painting hung in wealthy homes, a respectable surface over a current of suggestion. Douw's pupils copied the formula. Nicolaas Mies painted several scenes of idle servants meant as moral warnings. Pieter de Hooch was beginning to paint maids as exemplars of domestic virtue, but even his work retained echoes of the older tradition. Vermeer would have known all these paintings. His patron, Peter Kles van Rijven, a wealthy Catholic brewer born in 1624, likely owned early examples. On November 30th, 1657, according to notarial records preserved in the Delft City Archives, Van Rijven loaned Vermeer and Catharina 200 guilders. The loan document lists both husband and wife, suggesting Catharina had a nuptial agreement protecting her interests. Van Rijven would eventually own 21 paintings by Vermeer. Art historians cannot prove a formal commission agreement existed between them, but the relationship was clearly close. In 1665, Van Rijven's wife, Maria de Knoit, would bequeath Vermeer 500 guilders in her will, an extraordinary gesture. This is the compact Vermeer was working within. Paint what sold, kitchen maids sold, suggestions sold, fine detail sold. Vermeer had a wife, a growing family, a house to maintain. His father had left debts. The Delft economy in 1658 was still recovering from the terrible explosion 4 years earlier, known as the Delft Thunderclap, when a gunpowder store detonated and destroyed much of the city. Practical considerations pressed in from every side, and yet, sometime in the autumn of 1658, Vermeer picked up a brush loaded with pale paint and began covering over the jug holder he had sketched behind the maid's head. The moment this decision crystallized is not recorded in any letter or diary. What remains is visible in infrared reflectography performed by the Rijksmuseum in 2022. The imaging revealed a thick line of black paint beneath the milkmaid's left arm, applied hastily. Vermeer had sketched the composition in bold strokes, working out the light and dark values before adding detail. This contradicted the long-held assumption that Vermeer worked with extreme precision from the beginning. The scans showed an artist making rapid decisions, then refining them over time. The jug holder appears clearly in the imaging, a plank of wood with protruding pegs from which ceramic jugs hung by their handles. According to the estate inventory compiled after Vermeer's death in 1675, preserved in the Delft archives, his own pantry contained a similar jug holder. A miniature version exists in Petronella Ortmann's famous dollhouse from the same period, now displayed in the Rijksmuseum. This was standard kitchen equipment. Removing it from the painting was removing context, removing the marks of ordinary domestic life. The fire basket proved more difficult to identify in early X-rays. Only with short wavelength infrared reflectance imaging could conservators see it clearly. Woven from willow stems, called a withy basket, it would have held a ceramic bowl filled with glowing coals. These baskets warmed infants, dried diapers, and provided portable heat in the damp Dutch cold. Foot warmers appear frequently in Dutch genre paintings, often as symbols of female desire, as they would heat everything beneath a woman's long skirt. The Cupid tile visible at the base of the wall in the Milkmaid, near where the fire basket once was, makes this symbolic reading available. But Vermeer painted over the basket, leaving only the tile as the faintest suggestion. By removing these objects, Vermeer changed the painting's grammar. What had been a kitchen became a space. What had been narrative became duration. The scholar Arthur K. Wheelock, Jr., curator of Northern Baroque painting at the National Gallery and organizer of the historic Vermeer exhibition from 1995 to 1996, wrote that Vermeer directed the viewer's attention solely to the maid and her task by eliminating distractions. The cascade of the black frame at the painting's edge, the wicker basket on the windowsill, the brass pail below, all create lines that lead the eye down toward the thematic center. The pouring milk. Edward Snow, writing in critical assessments compiled by Essential Vermeer, observed that the painting is a melody of contrasting textures, rough and smooth, woven and molded, organic forms against manufactured ones. Vermeer also changed the maid's costume during the painting process. According to the same infrared imaging from 2022, her red skirt and blue apron underwent notable alterations not visible to the naked eye. The specific nature of these changes remains partially unclear, but they involved adjustments to color boundaries and the relationship between the garments and the wall behind her. Vermeer manipulated light and shadow to make her body three-dimensional in a way that appears entirely natural. Where her body receives sunlight, the rear wall falls into shadow. Where her body is shaded, the wall behind glows white with full illumination. This creates an effect of sculptural presence that confounds the eye. The pattern of light falling into the room is actually illogical, noted several technical analyses, but reads as absolutely convincing. The materials Vermeer used tell their own story about intention. Research published by the University of Antwerp's Axis Group in 2023, examining the painting with macroscopic X-ray powder diffraction scanning, revealed Vermeer's discriminating use of lead white pigment. He employed two types of lead white throughout his career, each with different properties. One type, made predominantly of hydrocerussite, has relatively large hexagonal crystals that align well when applied to canvas. This creates bright, reflective highlights. Vermeer used this in the woman's white cap, her forehead, and the areas where light hits most directly. For shadow zones and transparent whites, he used a different ratio of lead white components, creating softer, more atmospheric effects. The blue of the maid's apron represents a staggering expense. According to pigment analysis detailed by Colorlex in 2023, Vermeer painted the apron in natural ultramarine, a pigment made by grinding lapis lazuli imported from mines in eastern Afghanistan. The Metropolitan Museum of Art notes that in the 17th century this material cost more than gold by weight. Most Dutch painters of Vermeer's era used cheaper blue pigments like azurite or smalt, which would degrade over time. Rembrandt rarely used ultramarine. Vermeer applied it liberally, even in shadow areas where a less expensive substitute would be invisible to most viewers. Why spend this money? One answer emerges from analyzing other paintings where Vermeer used unstable yellow pigments that faded. In the art of painting, the laurel wreath held by the muse Clio was originally a shining green, created by mixing ultramarine with an organic yellow dye, possibly luteolin extracted from a plant called dyer's weld. The yellow faded over 3 centuries, leaving only blue visible today. Digital reconstruction by University of Antwerp researchers in 2023 showed what the original green must have looked like. In the Milkmaid, Vermeer used ultramarine paired with lead tin yellow for areas he wanted to remain stable. The blue we see today is the blue he saw in 1658. From what little is known about Vermeer's relationship to the art market, documented by art historian John Michael Montias in his 1989 Social History of the Painter, Vermeer appeared uninterested in painting for quick sale. He seemed to make art to satisfy an internal requirement, to create images that would survive time's degradations. The materials mattered. The Afghan lapis mattered. The stability mattered. The painting took months, possibly longer. Vermeer worked slowly. His total known output spans roughly 20 years and numbers only 35 paintings. This means an average of under 2 paintings per year, though the early years may have been more productive. He supported his family partly through his work as an art dealer, following his father's trade. Financial documents show he sold paintings by other artists and served as an expert authenticator, traveling to The Hague in 1672 to assess the authenticity of a disputed collection. But the pace of his own painting suggests a different priority. The Milkmaid required building up layers of paint, letting each dry before applying the next. The technique Vermeer employed for edges, the borderline between 2 adjacent surfaces, required precise timing. For the line between the maid's blue apron and the white wall, analysis shows he first painted black undermodeling that extends beyond the blue. Then he applied the blue carefully, then brought the white wall up to meet it. This creates an optical effect where the edge appears to exist in 3 dimensions rather than lying flat on canvas. The effect requires the paint to be at exactly the right consistency, which means waiting for earlier layers to reach specific stages of dryness. The ground layer, examined through cross-sections, consists of chalk, lead white, and umber applied over the original linen. The linen itself is remarkably regular and of high quality compared to canvases used by other 17th-century Dutch painters, including Rembrandt, whose supports show many irregularities in thread thickness. Vermeer appears to have been particular about his materials from the beginning, choosing fine plain weave linen that still retains its original tacking edges. The fabric borders where it was stretched onto the wooden strainer frame. During the months he worked, life continued around him. Katharina moved through the house, pregnant again. Her mother, Maria Thins, managed household accounts. Children played in the streets of Papists' Corner, where Catholics worshipped in hidden churches, and Protestant authorities looked the other way as long as discretion prevailed. The Inn Mechelen still operated on the market square, though Vermeer's mother Digna now managed it alone since Reynier's death in 1652. Vermeer would inherit the inn in 1670 and lease it to a chemist named Johannes van der Meer for 180 guilders per year. Letters from the period do not survive, if they ever existed. Vermeer left no written thoughts on his method, his intentions, or his choices. Art historian Walter Liedtke, writing in the Metropolitan Museum catalogue from 2009, noted that Vermeer's conversion to Catholicism shortly before his marriage appears to have been sincere. His 1666 painting, The Allegory of Faith, emphasizes the Eucharist and Catholic doctrine in ways that suggest personal conviction rather than mere accommodation to his wife's family. Some scholars speculate that Vermeer's mature paintings, with their emphasis on quiet, absorbed figures in moments of private devotion, reflect a contemplative spirituality. The Milkmaid can be read through this lens. A woman engaged in humble work, completely absorbed, her attention focused absolutely on the task before her. The art historian cited by Essential Vermeer wrote that she conveys one of the strongest values of 17th-century Netherlands, domestic virtue. The measured demeanor, modest dress, and judiciousness in preparing food elevate what could be mere drudgery to something approaching the heroic. A Forbes magazine writer, in a 2009 article, observed that it is not the allusions to female sexuality that give the painting its emotional resonance, but the depiction of honest, hard work as something romantic in itself. Yet the sexual readings never fully disappear. The Cupid tile remains at the base of the wall, barely noticeable but present. The foot warmer sits where the fire basket once was, a wooden box with a perforated top and a ceramic bowl inside for hot coals. Arthur K. Wheelock Jr. noted that in Visscher's emblem book, Sinne Poppen, published in 1614, an illustration called Mignon des Dames, or Servant of Ladies, shows a young man kneeling to attend to his lady's foot warmer. The accompanying text compares men who openly show desire to women who hide theirs. The burning of maidens can be hidden, the text reads. The coals exist in the heart. For a male viewer in 1658, particularly a wealthy patron like Peter van Ryven, these elements would register. The maid's pushed-up sleeves revealing pale skin normally covered. Her ample form, similar to Rubens' women from the previous generation. The faint smile scholars detect at the edges of her mouth. The painting offers domestic virtue and erotic possibility simultaneously, never resolving into either. Vermeer refused to make the choice explicit. He painted the moment between. When Vermeer finished the painting, he did not sign it. None of his paintings from this period carry visible signatures. The work entered Van Ruyven's collection, probably purchased directly from the artist. When Van Ruyven died in 1674, ownership passed to his widow Maria de Knoit, then likely to their daughter Magdalena van Ruyven, who married Jacob Discius, a printer. The estate of Jacob Discius held the painting until 1696, when a posthumous auction in Amsterdam offered it for sale. The auction catalogue, preserved and published by Gerard Hout, described it as exceptionally good. The Milkmaid sold for 175 guilders, the second highest price in the sale. Only Vermeer's View of Delft, a much larger canvas, sold for more at 200 guilders. For a painting measuring 45 by 41 centimeters, showing a single figure in a plain room, this represented remarkable value. Something in the work commanded attention beyond its size or subject matter. The painting changed hands multiple times through the 18th century. In 1765, an auction by Leendert Pieter de Neuville offered it. The catalogue entry called it the famous Milkmaid by Vermeer of Delft, artful. By this time, Vermeer's name was beginning to be forgotten. His work would be attributed to other painters for the next century. Art historians would argue over whether he had ever existed, or was a convenient fiction covering the work of multiple hands. The 19th century rediscovery began in France. French art critic Théophile Thoré, writing under the pen name William Berger, published a series of articles in the Gazette des Beaux-Arts in 1866. Thoré had spent years researching Dutch archives, tracking down paintings, correlating auction records. He called Vermeer a genius and worked to establish his canon. The articles generated international attention. Suddenly, museums and collectors wanted Vermeers. Prices climbed, attributions multiplied, some genuine, others wishful or fraudulent. The Milkmaid passed through at least 5 Amsterdam collections in the 19th century. Jan Jacob de Bruyn, an Amsterdam collector, owned it, and his sale in 1798 brought 1,550 guilders. In 1813, a sale by Hendrik Muhlmann achieved 2,125 guilders. Eventually, the painting came into the possession of Jonkheer Hendrik VI, Lord of Hillegom, who left it to his son Peter Hendrik VI, Lord of Romade. In 1908, the heirs of Peter Hendrik VI agreed to sell the painting. The Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, with support from the Vereniging Rembrandt, a society dedicated to keeping Dutch masterworks in the Netherlands, purchased the Milkmaid, along with 38 other paintings, for 550,000 guilders. This represented an extraordinary sum for a provincial museum. The acquisition generated national pride. Vermeer was becoming a symbol of Dutch cultural identity. The painting now held a museum accession number, SKA 2344, and a permanent home. Throughout the 20th century, the Milkmaid travelled occasionally. In 1939, the painting crossed the Atlantic for the World's Fair in New York. In 2009, for the 400th anniversary of Henry Hudson's voyage to Manhattan from Amsterdam, the Rijksmuseum lent the painting to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. This represented the first time the work had been in the United States since the World's Fair. The Metropolitan organized an exhibition titled Vermeer's Masterpiece, The Milkmaid, bringing together all 5 Vermeers in their collection, with works by Pieter de Hooch, Gabriel Metsu, Nicolaas Mies, and other Dutch Golden Age painters. Modern conservation efforts began in earnest in the 1990s. Traditional methods for analyzing pigments required removing tiny fragments of paint, usually from already damaged areas. This provided data, but only for microscopic sections. The development of non-invasive imaging technology changed everything. X-ray fluorescence mapping, infrared reflectography, and eventually macroscopic X-ray powder diffraction scanning allowed researchers to examine entire paintings at the molecular level without removing any material. The 2022 imaging campaign by the Rijksmuseum, conducted in preparation for a major Vermeer exhibition in 2023, brought together conservators from the Rijksmuseum and the Mauritshuis with scientists from the University of Antwerp. They used 3 overlapping techniques: reflectance, imaging, spectroscopy. In the shortwave infrared range, revealed compositional changes and provided information about pigments. Macroscopic X-ray fluorescence mapping showed underlying layers and chemical substances. Macroscopic X-ray powder diffraction scanning, a technique developed by doctoral researcher Frederik van Meert, analyzed the crystalline structure of pigments non-invasively. The discoveries announced at a September 8, 2022 press conference startled experts. Taco Dibbits, the Rijksmuseum's general director, stated in a press release that so much work had already been done on the Milkmaid over decades of study. They never anticipated something so definitive would surface. The jug holder and fire basket revealed an artist who worked more intuitively than previously, believed, sketching quickly, then revising towards simplification. This revised understanding of Vermeer's process connects to larger questions about artistic intention and time. The color we see today in the Milkmaid is close to the color Vermeer saw. The ultramarine has not faded. The lead whites retain their brightness. But small changes have occurred. Varnish layers applied and removed over centuries altered surface characteristics. The linen support darkened slightly. Atmospheric pollutants deposited microscopic layers. The painting conservators see under ultraviolet light shows patterns invisible in ordinary viewing conditions. Vincent van Gogh, painting the bedroom in 1888, used many unstable pigments that degraded over subsequent decades. The colors visible today in that painting differ substantially from what Van Gogh painted. Vermeer seems to have understood this risk. His choice of expensive, stable pigments suggests he wanted his colors to survive. Whether he consciously thought in terms of centuries is unknowable, but the evidence of his materials points towards someone building for duration. The present location of the Milkmaid is Gallery 230 in the Rijksmuseum, where it hangs as one of the museum's finest attractions. Millions of visitors have stood before it. Some stay for moments. Others remain for long stretches, drawn into the stillness the painting creates. The room itself is silent except for footsteps and the murmur of voices. The milk continues to fall through the air it fell through in 1658, motion captured as permanence. What Vermeer chose to leave in the painting matters as much as what he removed. The bread on the table, and an unusual amount according to art historians, suggests the maid is making bread porridge, combining stale bread with milk to create an economical meal. The brass pail, the wicker basket, the earthenware bowl, the white cap, the rolled sleeves. Each detail carries weight because so much else has been eliminated. The painting teaches a lesson about attention. By removing narrative, Vermeer forced the viewer to attend to something more difficult to name. Not a story, not a symbol. The thing itself. A woman pouring milk in morning light. The quality of her absorption. the way time behaves when someone gives their complete attention to a simple task, how stillness can contain motion, how an ordinary moment, observed with enough care, becomes extraordinary. In the years after completing The Milkmaid, Vermeer continued to work in this mode. He painted women reading letters, writing letters, weighing gold, playing musical instruments. Each figure absorbed in private activity. Each painted with the same attention to light, space, and the weight of objects in air. The paintings grew more refined, more spare. By the late 1660s, he was producing perhaps one canvas per year or fewer. The economic model could not sustain itself. The Dutch economy crashed in 1672 when France, England, Münster, and Cologne attacked the Dutch Republic simultaneously. This period, called the Rampjaar or disaster year, devastated trade. The art market collapsed. Vermeer, who supplemented his painting income through art dealing, found himself unable to sell work or to find buyers for other artists' paintings. Debts accumulated. In 1675, according to his widow's later testimony, preserved in the archives, Vermeer travelled to Gouda and Amsterdam on business for his mother-in-law, possibly attempting to borrow money fraudulently using her name. In the second week of December 1675, Johannes Vermeer fell ill. Catharina later described it as a frenzy brought on by stress over the family's financial difficulties. Within a day and a half, he went from being healthy to being dead. The burial register of the Oude Kerk in Delft records his interment on December 15th, 1675. He was 43 years old. He left Catharina and 8 children still living at home, with debts that would force her to petition for bankruptcy the following year. Catharina tried to save the art of painting, the most ambitious work remaining, by claiming it belonged to her mother, Maria Thins. A legal dispute ensued. Eventually, creditors took everything. The baker, Hendrik van Buyten, who had sold the family bread on credit, accepted 2 paintings as payment. Maria Thins died in 1680 and was buried next to Vermeer in the family crypt. Catharina survived until 1687, living in Breda and still trying to support 8 children, one of them sick, applying to the burgomasters of Gouda for assistance from charitable funds. The paintings dispersed. The Milkmaid entered its long migration through Dutch collections. For nearly 2 centuries, Vermeer's name appeared only in specialist literature and auction catalogues, often with mistaken attributions. Then Thore's articles changed everything. Museums began competing to acquire Vermeers. Scholars began debating technique and meaning. The questions multiplied. One question remains central. What makes a person spend months painting a woman pouring milk, using the most expensive materials available, eliminating everything unnecessary, attending to light and texture with such care that the result still stops viewers 3.5 centuries later? Perhaps the answer is in the question itself. Perhaps Vermeer understood that attention of this quality is its own reward, that to observe something ordinary with complete care transforms both the observer and the observed, that a woman pouring milk in morning light, if seen clearly enough, contains everything necessary. The stream of milk continues to fall. The room remains quiet. The light holds steady. And somewhere in the distance between the painter's hand and our eyes, across centuries and languages and changes we cannot count, the stillness speaks. This is what paintings do when they work. They become a place you can return to, a room that does not change, a moment that continues to unfold while remaining exactly ear itself. Vermeer painted such moments repeatedly, but never with more clarity than this. A maid, milk, light, silence, the patience to attend to what is actually there, and the understanding that sometimes what is there, seen rightly, is enough.